Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you. I moved into my father's home after my mother passed away last year. Dad was pushing 82 and had started forgetting things, small stuff like where he put his glasses or the code to his phone. He was still relatively healthy, no wheelchair or oxygen tank required, but I worried that living alone might become a problem. So I shifted my freelance writing job to remote and came to stay in his neighborhood. It was a quiet, seemingly friendly place, a small community with only 50 or so houses, most of them owned by retirees. No towering fences or elaborate landscaping, just neat lawns and folks who waved as they watered their flowers. Dad had served on the HOA board about a decade ago but stepped down due to stress. He never really liked the politics or constant bickering, though he respected that some structure could keep the neighborhood looking nice. At first, I didn't give the current HOA board much thought. Why would I? Everything seemed normal. That is, until I met Stacy. Stacy introduced herself one Saturday morning when I was trimming Dad's hedges. Her short, highlighted hair and bright pink cardigan definitely gave off those I'm in charge vibes. She rattled on about how happy she was that I'd moved in to help Dad. That part felt genuine, until she started telling me about the community standards. I found myself nodding politely while she lectured me on yard maintenance, approved window treatments, and guidelines for holiday decorations. The speed at which she ran through these rules was startling. She concluded by handing me a binder of documents that the new board had updated. "We just want to ensure the area stays tidy," she said with a tight smile. "Please read it carefully." I only skimmed the binder. It was stuffed with policies on everything from when you could set out the trash to the acceptable style of outdoor lighting. I rolled my eyes, but Dad shrugged and said, "Better to just keep the peace, kiddo." Since the house was already set up the way Dad liked it, neutral paint, no excessive lawn ornaments, I assumed we'd be in compliance, no fuss. The first sign of trouble cropped up about a month later. Dad had formed a small chess group with 3 of his oldest buddies, Martin, a former journalist, Eli, a retired teacher, and Bill, an ex-Marine who used to be on the HOA board with Dad. They'd meet twice a week in the afternoon to chat, eat pastries, and duel it out on the chessboard. Sometimes I joined in, mostly to keep Dad engaged. Frankly, it was fun listening to them talk about old times. Because they were older, they tended to speak louder, especially when the conversation got spirited. Still, they never played loud music or created nighttime disturbances. Late one afternoon, Stacy appeared on our porch, unannounced, arms folded across her pink cardigan. "We've had complaints about gatherings," she said. "Apparently, there's a lot of noise during the day. Laughing, shouting, car doors slamming." Before I could respond, Dad stepped around me. "We're just playing chess, Stacy. We all live here. These are my friends." "Right," she replied, her smile now gone. "But we want to keep it peaceful. The community has standards about large gatherings." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Large? It's 4 people total, sometimes 5 if my son joins." Stacy shrugged. "Still, we have to make sure it doesn't become a distraction. Please keep it down." Then she turned and left, leaving me baffled. I checked the HOA binder and found no rule about gathering with a few neighbors. The noise ordinance only mentioned excessive disturbance and typically applied to late-night parties or repeated complaints involving loud music. Dad's chess sessions weren't anything close. But Dad insisted we let it go. He said, "Just wait and see if we actually get a written complaint." Sure enough, 2 weeks later, we received an official notice from the HOA. It stated that a formal complaint had been lodged regarding disturbing noise levels and unapproved social events. We were fined $25. The letter said if we didn't pay within 14 days and address the disturbance, the fines could escalate. I sighed, wondering who in the world was complaining. Were the guys really being that loud? I told Dad I'd just pay the fee. $25 wasn't worth an argument. But Dad's eyes sparked with defiance. "It's principle, son. We did nothing wrong. If we keep quiet now, this nonsense will continue." Despite his age, Dad's mind was still sharp. He instructed me to draft a letter disputing the complaint. We had the right to request proof or documentation, like a decibel reading or multiple eyewitness accounts. I typed it up and sent it to the HOA board's email. A couple of days passed with no response, until I checked the mailbox on the third day. Inside was a heavy envelope from the HOA. Another fine for $50, now citing failure to comply with noise regulations and the presence of unauthorized guests. My heart sank. This was how petty things started. Dad's friends all lived here, so how could they be unauthorized guests? I marched to the HOA office, a small building at the entrance to the neighborhood. Stacy wasn't there. A bored-looking woman handed me a copy of the complaint forms. They were anonymous, which the HOA bylaws evidently allowed to protect whistleblowers. The strangest part was that each form mentioned disrespectful chatter, shouting, and blocking the street with cars. That last part might have been referencing Bill's truck, but he always parked legally. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, scanning the papers. The woman gave me a shrug that seemed to say, "Don't kill the messenger." She advised me to attend the next board meeting if I wanted to dispute the fines in person. That evening, Dad and I sat around the dining table, frustration mounting. I could see the worry etched into his features. He was proud of his chess group. It kept him social and alert, something that was important at his age. Now, the HOA was labeling him a nuisance. "It's not even the money," he said. "It's the principle. This is our home." We decided we'd attend the next board meeting, scheduled for the following Thursday. Meanwhile, Dad refused to back down on the chess sessions. He still had his friends over, albeit more quietly. None of us wanted a confrontation. But apparently, confrontation was heading straight for us. Because less than a week later, right before the board meeting, the police showed up at our doorstep. 2 uniformed officers, responding to a call about a disturbance involving possible elder abuse. My heart dropped into my stomach. The neighbors were now calling the police on us? The lead officer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "We got a report of yelling coming from inside the house. Something about an older gentleman in distress." Dad blinked, baffled. "I'm the older gentleman," he said, "and I'm perfectly fine." He even cracked a joke, "Unless you have a bone to pick about my chess strategy." The younger officer gave a half smile, but protocol meant they had to check the situation thoroughly. They came inside, asked a few questions, took note of Dad's condition. He was clearly not abused, nor was there any real disturbance. They apologized for the inconvenience and left, telling us to call if we had any idea who made the false report. We stood there in disbelief. Dad's eyes narrowed. "This is more than an HOA feud now," he said softly. "Someone wants to cause serious trouble." The night of the HOA meeting, we arrived at the community center to find a small crowd. The board members sat at a long table up front, calling on various neighbors to address old business, mostly routine stuff like potholes and landscaping budgets. As we waited our turn, I scanned the room and realized we were the youngest people there, by a margin of at least 15 years. Dad, though in his early 80s, still had a presence about him. I noticed a few neighbors shooting him sympathetic looks, while others avoided eye contact entirely. Possibly the rumor mill was churning. Finally, the board chair, a soft-spoken woman named Greta, announced our topic. "We have a resident disputing recent fines related to noise complaints, gatherings, and alleged unauthorized guests." She glanced over at us. "Mr. Morrison, Mr. Morris Jr., would you like to address the board?" Dad stood, clearing his throat. "Yes, thank you. We're here to find out exactly how my friendly chess games could violate any HOA regulation. My friends and I all live in this neighborhood. We aren't hosting large parties, we aren't blasting music, and we sure aren't harming anyone." He held the 2 fine notices up. "And yet, we're being fined and accused. On top of that, someone called the police claiming elder abuse in my home." A hush fell over the room. Greta leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Elder abuse? We certainly didn't file that kind of complaint." "I have no proof who did," Dad continued, "but this all started after we got that first noise complaint. I'd like to request that these fines be rescinded. There's no evidence of any real violation." One of the board members, John, tried to project an air of neutrality. "We rely on neighbors to report disturbances. The forms are anonymous for protection. We can't simply dismiss complaints because someone denies them. I raised my hand. But can you show any evidence? Time-stamped recordings, photos of obstructed driveways? Something to back up these accusations? Because all we see are vague references to noise. That's subjective. If no one can provide more details, how can we be in violation? Stacy, perched at the far end of the table with her arms crossed, suddenly jumped in. We've had multiple complaints, not just one. And if a resident feels uncomfortable or threatened, that's enough to warrant action. Our goal is to maintain a peaceful, safe environment. Threatened by what? Dad's voice carried an edge. 2 rooks and a bishop. A few muffled chuckles arose from the audience, but Stacy's face remained cold. It's not funny. Some neighbors feel stressed by rowdy gatherings. Maybe the conversation is too loud, or they're worried about you. She paused, clearly aiming to twist the narrative. We are all concerned for your well-being, and if there's a suspicion that you might be vulnerable or in a dangerous situation. Dad scoffed. I'm old, not incompetent. Don't play the concern card to impose these pointless fines. A man in the front row, who I recognized as Bill, Dad's ex-Marine buddy, stood up. I'm one of the so-called guests. I resent the implication that we're anything but respectful neighbors. If I parked incorrectly or got rowdy, I'd own up to it. But none of that happened. Someone here is abusing the system. Greta tried to regain order. Let's be civil. We'll review the matter carefully. For now, the fines stand, but we can schedule a formal hearing to present evidence. Each side can bring testimony or witnesses. If it's shown that the complaints are unsubstantiated, we'll withdraw the fines. I felt my chest tighten. It was a bureaucratic runaround. Dad pressed on. Fine. We'll bring our own evidence then. But while we wait, we aren't paying a cent. You can take that to the bank. The meeting adjourned soon after, and the chatter in the room was thick with speculation. I noticed Stacy stepping away, quickly gathering her things. She didn't want a direct confrontation with us. Dad and I approached Greta, hoping to reason with her one-on-one. She apologized for the inconvenience and assured us that if we could prove the noise complaints were unfounded, the board would drop the matter. But the board had to appear fair and impartial, so they couldn't just side with us outright. We don't want to alienate any residents, she explained. Which is exactly how 1 or 2 busybodies can hijack the entire neighborhood, Dad muttered under his breath. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the neighborhood became palpable. My father's chess group met less often because the guys were worried. Every time Bill's truck pulled up, I would catch glimpses of curtains twitching. It felt like someone was watching us, waiting for a reason to complain or make another bogus call to the police. Dad tried to remain calm, but I could see the frustration gnawing at him. On more than one occasion, he asked me, should we sell the house? Move somewhere else? And that was the heartbreaking part. This was Dad's home. He'd spent years here with Mom, built memories in these rooms, on this street. The idea of leaving just because of some petty feud was appalling. But the stress was getting to him. Then came the second police incident. An officer showed up, responding to a call about possible trespassing. We'd been sitting in the living room playing Scrabble. Chess was on a temporary hiatus. The cops said someone reported suspicious individuals entering our side gate. Turned out to be Dad's longtime handyman, Fernando, who'd come by to fix a leaky outdoor faucet. Nothing illegal. The officer left, apologizing again, but the message was clear: whoever was behind these calls was relentless. Feeling desperate, I installed a simple security camera at the front door and another pointing toward the driveway, both well within legal guidelines for private property. I figured that if we could catch the next anonymous caller creeping around, we might identify them. Dad worried we'd break some arcane rule about cameras, but after rummaging through the massive HOA binder, I found no mention banning standard home security systems. That's when we got the letter. It was from the HOA's legal counsel, stating we were in violation of community privacy guidelines for installing surveillance equipment that could capture footage of neighbors without their permission. They threatened to escalate the matter if we didn't remove the cameras immediately. Dad and I stared at each other in disbelief. This was absolutely insane, Countless homeowners across the country have doorbell cams. Why was our HOA so dead set on shutting down any means we had of protecting ourselves? Dad's face tightened. That's it, he said quietly. We tried reason. We tried calm. Now we do it my way. If they want a legal battle, they'll get one. I had no idea how we would manage a legal fight. Lawyers are expensive, and Dad's retirement savings weren't bottomless. But the alternative was to keep paying arbitrary fines and letting the police barge in every time an anonymous tip came through. So we began gathering everything: timestamps, phone records, statements from Dad's friends and neighbors who supported us. If we had to take this to court to prove harassment, we'd be ready. A part of me still wondered, is Stacy the ringleader, or just the face of a bigger problem? All I knew was that someone in the HOA was actively targeting us, and we had to push back. Otherwise, Dad's twilight years would be consumed by stress and intimidation. Within a month, things escalated even further. The board scheduled a special hearing about our camera violation and the outstanding fines. They also hinted that if we refused to comply, they could move toward a lien on the property for unpaid fees. That was when we decided to contact Dad's old friend, Henry, a retired attorney who specialized in property law back in his day. We explained the situation, half expecting him to decline. He was nearly Dad's age, after all. But Henry took one look at the stack of documents and said, "I'll represent you, pro bono. This is a textbook case of selective enforcement and possible harassment." The hearing was set for a Thursday evening in the community center. We arrived with Henry, who, despite walking with a slight limp, carried himself with confidence. The board was seated at the front, and a modest audience had gathered, likely eager for the drama. Stacy wore a stiff expression, occasionally whispering to another board member. Greta tried to maintain her neutral demeanor. Henry began by questioning the validity of the fines. He cited specific sections of the HOA bylaws that contradicted the board's interpretation of unapproved gatherings. He also pointed out that none of the official complaint forms specified an actual rule number. They refer vaguely to noise and disturbance, but the policy states it must be ongoing, documented, and validated by more than one resident. "Where is that proof?" he demanded, flipping through pages. John, the board member who had tried to stay neutral, cleared his throat. "We rely on the integrity of residents to report truthfully. Releasing their names could expose them to retaliation." Henry's voice was calm yet forceful. "That's exactly how harassment and malicious complaints go unchecked. There is zero evidence, only anonymous forms." Meanwhile, the police were called twice, each time finding no wrongdoing. Those false reports could indicate malicious intent. Stacy tried to interrupt. "We are not responsible for police calls. That's outside our purview." Henry didn't miss a beat. "Yes, but what about the letter demanding the removal of my client's security cameras? There is no clause in the bylaws that prohibits a standard home camera. In fact, these cameras are often recommended for the safety of elderly residents. Yet this board used vague references to privacy guidelines to bully my client into dismantling them." Greta's eyes darted nervously to Stacy. "Stacy, do we have the specific guideline that addresses surveillance?" Stacy hesitated. "We were advised by legal counsel that." "Which counsel?" Henry interjected, scanning the letter. "This letter is from a local law firm, not a firm specializing in HOA statutes. I suspect the board hired them specifically to intimidate. If you had real grounds, you'd cite the exact bylaw. Which you haven't." A hush settled over the room. Dad looked around, noticing that quite a few neighbors seemed shocked at Henry's methodical takedown. Even a couple of board members exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Greta spoke, her voice trembling slightly. We need time to review this. Perhaps we can negotiate a resolution that will satisfy both parties without proceeding with further legal action." Henry was waiting for that opening. "Excellent. My client wants all fines dropped immediately. Furthermore, we request a written apology for the undue stress, and a formal statement from the board clarifying that small gatherings in one's own home are permitted, so long as they don't violate established noise ordinances, which these certainly do not. And the cameras stay up." Stacy tensed. "That's excessive. We've done nothing to warrant an apology. An unexpected voice piped up from the audience. Bill, the ex-Marine. Hold on. You folks have been harassing an elderly man for playing chess. Now you're messing with his son's right to protect his dad with cameras. I'd say an apology is the least you could do. A few nods rippled through the crowd. Greta exhaled slowly. Given the circumstances, we'll discuss the matter among board members privately. Please allow us a few minutes. The board filed out to a small adjacent office, leaving everyone else seated and whispering in hushed tones. It took them nearly half an hour to return. By then, half the audience had grown restless, but Dad and I were sitting calmly with Henry. He leaned over to Dad, whispering, "Don't worry. They don't have a leg to stand on." When the board finally reappeared, Greta cleared her throat. "We've agreed to rescind all fines related to Mr. Morris's gatherings, effective immediately, and we will not pursue any legal action regarding the cameras." She glanced at Stacy, who seemed to stare daggers. "We apologize for any confusion or distress caused by the original notices. As for the apology letter, we will draft something formal that clarifies these misunderstandings." Dad let out a breath. I couldn't help but grin. The sense of relief that washed over me was enormous. But Henry wasn't finished. "One final matter. My client wants to ensure no further retaliation occurs. The false police reports have put them under tremendous strain. If we find that the board or any member is involved in encouraging such calls, we won't hesitate to pursue harassment charges." Greta nodded firmly. "Understood. The board does not condone false reporting. We will cooperate with any law enforcement investigation into those incidents." And with that, the hearing ended. We thanked Henry profusely. The man simply smiled and said, "Justice may be slow, but it's out there if you know how to find it." Walking to our car, Dad's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. "I'm just glad it's over," he murmured. "But who do you think was really behind all the calls and nonsense?" I looked over my shoulder to see Stacy hurrying to her car, face tight with barely contained anger. "I have my suspicions," I replied. "But at least now she knows we're not so easy to push around." Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. Over the following days, neighbors who'd barely acknowledged us before started offering friendly waves or even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. It turned out more than a few folks were worried about being Stacy's next target. We realized we weren't alone in feeling intimidated. Some residents mentioned older rules enforced in petty ways, like banning certain holiday wreaths or fining people for having outside contractors come too early in the morning. The difference was, nobody had fought back as decisively as we did. Dad's chess group resumed their normal schedule, and life started to feel peaceful again. Of course, there were still occasional side-eye glances from Stacy, but we no longer cared. Our cameras stayed up, and no new letters arrived in the mail. The police never showed up again. A month later, I was chatting with Dad when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was Greta. She looked rather humble, carrying a small box of cookies. "Just wanted to personally drop these off as a friendly gesture, and to let you know the board approved new guidelines making it clearer that small social gatherings are allowed without prior approval," she said. "We also specified that standard home security cameras are permitted." The vote was unanimous. Dad chuckled, genuinely touched. "Well, that's good news. Thank you, Greta." She gave a polite nod, glancing back at her car. "I truly hope the neighborhood can move forward peacefully."